Hi, Soumya. Hi, Shyamala. How are things in Winnipeg?
Actually, not bad. The world is busy and the world is unseasonably quiet at the same time.
And you're both doctors, so I'm guessing that's going to keep you really busy as well.
To an extent, both of us work in.
That part doesn't stop.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Both of us work frontline, so there's a certain amount of when you're in the hospital, it's very busy, and when you're out of the hospital, you try really hard to do something that's not hospital.
Right. Which is, I'm guessing, dance.
Dance, of course.
Okay.
You sort of split your head. One half does what it has to do, the other half does what it needs to do.
Right.
And you kind of need both right now.
And I'm really interested in knowing how you find that balance, and also how Manohar Performing Arts, which is, one of the oldest institutions of dance in Canada, is functioning through these unprecedented times. Tell us, Shyamala.
Dance by distance is really hard, and we're not of that technological generation for whom this comes second nature. That said, we are having dance classes over Zoom, a lot of serious body conditioning workouts, and also working on new jatis. But it's forcing us to rethink about how we view dance as a performing art. And this sort of moment of silence in performance is, I think, changing our internal dialogue a lot. So you may have some thoughts on that.
Because, I mean, everyone is finally in the same boat. And that doesn't, it's not to say that South Asian dance was always in a more difficult position than other artists, but in a way, we're finding our feet in a new performance environment, and everyone is now finding their feet in a new performance environment. There is possibly a feeling that this is a chance. It's not just it's a negative situation for everyone. I mean, that it goes without saying, but in that negative, there is the chance of reinventing what we think of as performance, what we think of as venue, what we think of as the way we want to approach our art and the way we want other people to start.
Right.
Opportunity of doing things differently that they're for everybody, all artists, from symphony performers to freelance dancers. Everyone is in the same position of how they want to do out into a new world that's more digital than physical.
Right.
In a way,
it makes us think a lot about what we do, why we do it.
Yeah. Shyamala, you were saying?
Our proscenium has gone from the great proscenium of the theater to this little screen. And we've started thinking about choreography within that space, which is in a way taking us back to, I remember learning from Kalanidhi Mami, and just her face and her hands would move in about the same frame. And somehow we're going back to that, where again, we're moving within this frame.
Box.
And so the athleticism of performance has come down to a very concentrated space. And so the way we're training and the way we're preparing is kind of taking into consideration, how do we tell our stories when our space has changed and our frame has changed?
Right, right.
And in a way, creating a evening length of dance performance, particularly storytelling, it is like writing a novel. And I think Manohar, over the last, 25 years, has written about 25 novels in that sense. With every year or so,
it's time to start doing short stories now.
Yeah. Yeah, and vignettes, and the arc of the story has changed because, as you know, people don't have that patience to watch long videos. You can't, the way a 2-hour dance performance would capture you and you did not even notice that time had gone. video does not have that quality.
You're right. You're right.
And so dance that would hold you for a sort of this is a suspended moment of time in which you didn't notice that you had been sitting in that room. Now the viewer is going to want you to pay for every second there, because come on, my eyes will only watch the screen for so long. And so then the nature of how you,
and let's be honest, everyone's been staring at screens all day.
Yeah.
So the nature of how you tell story has changed, and the arc of that story has changed. Story hasn't changed, and I would say this is one thing that we have always kind of loved about creating dance performance, is the aspect of storytelling and of deconstructing stories and finding new ways to tell stories. But we have to find a way to do that perhaps a little faster, perhaps a little bit less extended in scope, and a little bit more concentrated in time.
Yeah, the treatment of the story, right? And also,
and the kind of story, and what makes a story danceable. Because what may make a story danceable in the old traditional big stage performance sense won't be what makes it danceable in a short, different digital sense. It's an opportunity of creating a very different site-specific dance, and only our site has changed. Our site is now everybody's new site, and that's kind of new territory for a lot of people. And it's I'm not going to say it's everyone's first choice of favorite site, but it's our new site. So let's become specific to it, respond to it.
Yeah. And what do you think the challenges would be, especially tackling our kind of dance? When you're talking about Bharatanatyam, when you're talking about Kathak, when you're talking about the kind of repertoire, the kind of, like you said, the athleticism and the content that we have, to distill it down to I don't know if distilling it down is the right word, but to bring it to, like you said, a new frame, a new framework, a new box. What are the challenges?
We have to think that some of the box has been there before. When Bharatanatyam was presented in temples, the boxes that you were presenting in were quite constrained. They were circumscribed. There was your front that was towards the deity, and there were your corners that were towards the men and the women. And the space you were dancing in was very small. And so it could have been athletic, but it has to be athletic on that X on the ground.
Right.
It also, it feels like for a lot of years, dance has been, and I don't even just mean Bharatanatyam, Kathak, dance in general has been more about its athleticism in across the board in many styles. And it's a matter of discovering not just athleticism, but what is movement and what is stage action that translates. And it's not just about how it looks, it's about how it communicates. And I feel like I don't want to create something that is only about, oh wow, look at her Adhamandalam, oh wow, look at her or his ability to move his leg in this way. The physicality is wonderful, but I'm thinking less about physicality than I am about what is this communicating? Is this of interest to me as a viewer, if I were the viewer, and not just about its technical aspects? So sometimes the idea of dance being impressive has to be dialed back, and it's more a matter of what is it saying rather than am I impressed by it?
I was reading a number of, it's funny where inspiration comes from right now. I was reading, it was an autobiography of Michael Caine, who's an incredible screen actor. And he talks about how when the camera comes in tight to you, your acting changes.
Yeah, yeah.
And how, you know, the pupils of your eyes now have to be exactly where they think they're going to be. You cannot have that moment of thought of what's my next line, because that's written on your face at the size of the screen when someone's watching it.
Right.
And similarly, Ian McKellen had written something about when he was acting Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, and he was saying about how he had a very tight shot in a very dramatic moment just before his character falls into the pit of fire. And he had to create movement in that moment. But the camera is just tight on, you can literally only see the upper part of his face.
Mm.
And he said he had to figure out how to bring his hands into the frame and what would move, and to create punctuation in that, which is very dance-like in that the way he described it, that you can create some punctuation with your eyes, but how much of that can you do when your eyes are occupying the whole screen? It becomes too much.
Right.
So then he had a staff in his hand as Gandalf, and he would pass the staff from one hand to the other. And just that flick of movement across the screen became his punctuation.
Right.
These are things that we have to think about when we start focusing our dance so closely, where instead of being an audience of 1,000 people, and so we would act broad.
Right.
Now the audience is like an audience of one.
Yeah. Yeah.
As far away from me as you are. And so that audience of one will react very differently to movement in that space. And so dance has to, I think, evolve a little bit to make small things large and large things small.
Wonderful. That's a lot of beautiful insight to think about as we're into creating new stuff, you know, creating new material for this new space that you're talking about. Oh, and as teachers, as leaders, as artistic directors of your company, how do you see, have you thought about, have you had the time to think about how you train your dancers now? What do you give them to keep them inspired?
See here, Manohar is in one way, because it's a collective. So we're looking to take people who have a base in dance and saying, okay, how can we in this new time, rather than all getting together to put our minds together, how can we do this? How can we be a collective together apart? And that means the hardest thing is the motivation of doing a collective art separately.
Right.
I feel like we've always had a bit of an advantage in that we've always had dancers who've danced with us who did not live in Winnipeg and who were coming into Winnipeg, or we were going to their city to perform something. So we've been accustomed to sending video, to learning from video, learning from each other in a bit of a distance way, but more than anything, to having to encourage each other from afar. And it's now afar used to mean Winnipeg to Ottawa. Now it means from this block to her block.
Your house to my house.
Yeah, and it's the same afar. So the hardest part actually is creating the motivation to want to do the thing we used to do together, but doing it together but separately, and still feeling like that's togetherness. So me practicing by myself should not feel like me now divorced from the group. I'm doing it with the group. I'm doing it for the group. The challenges are physical also. I mean, I used to be able to practice in her home studio. Well, so much for that. Mm-hmm. So I have to, clear things out of my kitchen, practice there, and hope I don't step on the cat. That's everyone's situation. Everyone is making their new way of trying to keep their body instrument in the condition they want it, but more than anything, keeping your mental instrument in a condition where it feels like being creative is still worthwhile, where being creative still has an outlet. And I feel like Manohar's strength has been the ability to take everybody's creativity, put it all together and say, all right, we can now make something out of what we're all working on together. And so keeping us inspired has, I won't say we don't want to be inspired, but sometimes it's easy to fall into inertia, especially when you can't get together and you can't physically feel that togetherness. So it's the constant encouragement of each other to each other. It's keeping, our coordinator is our mother,
Nice.
Menaka Dakshinamurti, and Usha Sharma, who does all our Kathak choreography. She's our artistic director. We're calling them constantly because, of course, we can't expose them, they can't expose us, but we want the inspiration of wanting to do it to keep us doing it. So it's less that we're training others, but we are trying to keep kicking each other.
Yeah, yeah.
Virtually.
There's also this question that we were discussing, is this a hibernation or is it a fallow period? Are we dropping our metabolic rate as we're sitting here, waiting to be able to perform again? Or is this fertile ground that
I think I'm metamorphosing.
And I think there's something to be said for, in the stillness, what's going to grow out of this? What's under the ground growing?
I would like to be a chrysalis. You can't see what's happening in there, but something really big is happening in there. And then once that chrysalis opens out, I'm hoping it'll be like this beautiful butterfly and not this like sad little moth that just goes out and eats some cloth or something. I want it to be a nice butterfly, but I'm not quite sure what's happening in there. I just want to make sure I'm keeping on giving it the nutrients to do what it does in its little chrysalis.
This is why
we're all kind of chrysalising.
This is why I love speaking with you all, because you make everything sound so poetic and so beautiful and profound. Like, clearly, your left and your right sides of your brain are in top shape.
It's a question now as to, like, if I'm looking for motivation to perform, what possibly could I say right now that anybody would wish to hear? What, you know, all the stories that we were working on in our minds, working with each other, script writing, storyboarding that we were working on before, I'm not sure right now that they are speaking to me.
Right.
What speaks to me now might be something very different, because we've all gone through this collective experience of aloneness and a certain fear.
Right.
There's a Tyagaraja Kriti that we had done this as part of a show years ago, Tanaloni Dhyaninchi, which is Alone I Imagine You. And that alone, what constitutes alone, suddenly has changed.
Right.
So if we ever perform that Kriti again, it's going to be a very different dance.
Yeah.
This is a time also to start imbibing influences and really letting influences happen. So there is lots of art out there. So this is the time to listen to music, read lots of books, experience poetry, experience all the things that help spark whatever that creative impulse is going to be, to make dance not just about the physical must practice, must exercise, to make it to start using the creative muscles, start making your creative muscles move in ways you weren't thinking of doing. If necessary, take it back to when we were all learning and we would be practicing our expressions in the bathroom mirrors to whatever piece of music you were required to be able to do your abhinaya to. So now is the time to be doing that, because that's our creative muscles. And it's when you do something interesting for yourself that you start to think of how interesting it will be to others. You know, we're our own Rasika. We are our first audience. My bathroom mirror was my first fan. And I want to keep making my bathroom mirror proud of me. So I want to take time when I'm not able to go big, to do the big performances, to exercise not just the physical me, but to start to exercise the little creative me's that maybe are never going to be presented. But if I don't practice those little things and exercise those little things, I won't know what I have.
Right, right. That's great. I'm so glad I got to speak with you all. As I know we're running out of time, but as my final question, where would you, as leaders of South Asian dance in the country, see Indian dance go in the future? What do you feel needs to change for Indian dance, or where does Indian dance need to go?
The first thing I want to feel is, I want to feel that dance that has an origin in South Asia will also be Canadian dance, because French and Russian and Italian ballet is just called ballet. And we do not tie it to another country necessarily and expect that that means it no longer has Canadianness or never did. So I want South Asian dance to be Bharatanatyam and Kathak and Kuchipudi, and to be the forms they are, and to be Canadian because we are doing them in Canada and are Canadians doing them, and that our audiences are in Canada and now across the world. I don't like the distinction that has historically been made between the European arts, which get to be at home anywhere, and the non-European arts, which must be exclusive to their countries of origin. If the pandemic has taught us nothing else, it is that there is one globe, just one. We are all connected for good or bad. If I'm going to be connected across the world because of that pandemic, then by God, I wish to be connected to the rest of the world by art, and not in a your art and my art way. I want us to realize this is all art, whether we call it content or whether we call it spirituality. It doesn't matter for what reason we're all witnessing art together. It's a shared thing, and I want the barriers not to exist.
Shyamala?
I would say one thing that I would like to see come back more to the fore in Indian dance, in Bharatanatyam, Kathak, but also in mainstream dance, in contemporary dance, is story. We have so foregrounded the athleticism of dance that we've sort of backgrounded a little bit the concept of narrative, and looking at narrative from a literary lens, deconstructing narrative, using narrative as a tool to force a different kind of thought. There are so many ways in which we can capture the mind. The word Manohar means to capture the mind, and yet the mind is out there to be captured by very few things. And the things that really capture the mind are storytelling, which we find at the heart of every culture around the globe. It's perhaps the most common ground we all have.
Right.
And so to see story come back as a fulcrum for our presentations, rather perhaps than the sheer physicality, which is gorgeous, but maybe a little bit more difficult to project onto a screen than story.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, ladies. I know in your busy schedules to carve this out for me is a big thing. As now, if I may get a little selfish and ask you, as doctors, do you have the insights on what we can expect? Or what
I wish the world had those insights. I don't think we're going to be back on a stage for a year from now. I'll tell you that. I think
we're going to need the distancing if we don't want a second wave,
right?
Frankly.
And
I
that
think
means
it's going to go on longer than people want it to.
This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so we have to pace our distancing. We have to find ways to connect with each other, love each other across distance, because it's going to be a while. And for art, we have to hold our breaths for this. And so we have to find ways to do it. I think we have to reinvent ourselves technologically as well. We also have to,
I'm thinking of our audiences too.
Mm-hmm.
Our audiences deserve that we do not expect them to take a risk for us. Our audiences are vulnerable.
Right.
We may be vulnerable, they're more vulnerable.
We are one person on a stage. They are 300 people packed together in the theater.
Yeah, can't do that right now. It is a strange year of rediscovery, but it's going to be a year before people feel comfortable being in audiences, and I think it's going to be a year before people feel safe not distancing, and that's in a best case scenario with good distancing. I mean, fingers crossed, vaccine, but a
vaccine takes 18 months to develop.
Yeah, this is a year away.
Okay. All right. So like you said, Soumya, embrace the situation and make the best of it, right?
Chrysalis, everyone, we can do this.
Thank you so much, sisters. Thank you so much. It was such a joy to talk to you both. Yeah.
Lovely.
Thanks very much. This is an awesome series, and it is so important for us to get a chance to connect. The downside of the Chrysalis is not as much can come in as you want it to, but the upside of Chrysalis is maybe it focuses our minds and we connect a little bit more than we did before.
Right. That's right. Thank you. Onward we go.
Thanks.